we form tribes as humans throughout human history, form tribes and have directed hate toward other tribes and sometimes violence and destruction. And yet, tribalism allows you to tell a story to your children, allows you to grow a culture. There's something about defining yourself within a particular tribe
Yeah.
that allows you to have a tradition.
Yeah.
You have a article that you wrote called "The Case for Black Patriotism."
Oh, yeah.
So I should also say it's so interesting because for me personally, I feel, identify as, believe I am an American. And yet within the American umbrella, it feels that there's a longing for other tribes. You mentioned Jewish, but what I honestly feel is, I mean, a lot of it is humor and culture and so on, is Russian and Ukrainian, because that's where I come from.
Yeah.
That's where my family is from.
Yeah.
You know, there's like stereotypical things that are funny, humorous type of thing about Russians, showing no emotion, good at chess and math, into wrestling, drinking vodka. I mean, there's literally every single stereotype. I'm in the embodiment of that.
Yeah.
So you celebrate that in certain kinds of ways. There's a tradition there within the American umbrella, and some of it is humor, some of it is little quirks of culture. But now with the war in Russia and Ukraine, interestingly enough, even that little thing, it becomes also a source of negative tribalism. But anyway, that context aside, what is Black patriotism, and why do you feel?
I mean, I'm speaking in an article called "The Case for Black Patriotism" in a particular context. And what I'm saying basically is very simple. I'm saying we are African Americans, and the emphasis should be on the American. I actually don't even much care for the framing African American, but I'm not going to fight with people about it. It's, I don't think it's worth fighting about. That's not how I would just say we're Americans. Or if you want, we're Black Americans. We're certainly not African. That is, the African American population is a population of people who come into existence here in North America through the cauldron of slavery. There are also immigrants from East Africa, immigrants from West Africa, immigrants from Southern Africa, immigrants from the Caribbean who descend from an ancestral population, which is African. The history of the world since 1500 is a history in which people of African descent are scattered because of slavery throughout the Western Hemisphere. And so here we are. But the institution of slavery ended in 1863 in the United States. The struggle that we started out talking about, which gave rise to Martin Luther King giving that speech that you say is the greatest speech in American history, and I'm not going to argue with you about that, happened right here in the United States.
Yes.
What is the United States? The United States is a nation of immigrants. The population of the North American continent was sparsely populated by an indigenous population, which was destroyed in conquest by a European population that settled here in North America and appropriated the land and have built a civilization here, which has been peopled by a large influx of individuals from Europe, the Irish and Italian and Greek and Slavic and Jewish, Russian Jews coming in large numbers and so on, and wave after wave after wave of immigration. Asian, Latin American population of people who have come to reside here in the United States, and we Black Americans who descend from slaves. We African Americans who descend from slaves. So here we are. This is a great nation. I mean, this is a monumentally significant political force, which is the United States of America, founded in 1776, 1787, fought a war of independence from the British, established a republic, which is a confederation of these independent colonies, which has grown into now the 50 states of the United States of America, a continental nation. The richest and most powerful nation on the planet, with massive influence throughout the world, for good and for ill. That's who we are, I want to say to Black people. There is no other home for us. This fantasy of we being a people apart, back in the day when I was coming along in the 1960s, there was something called the Republic of New Africa movement. And they wanted some states in the South given over to Black people, and we were going to have our own country. And it's a joke. It's a fantasy. It's a mythic, unbalanced, unrealistic, fanciful politics. It's not a serious politics. We're Americans. We're not going anywhere here. The idea that, and I want to say this in a number of different registers. I want to say, first of all, we need to make peace with the fact that that's who we are and that's where we are. So nobody is coming. The World Court is not going to litigate our disputes. The United Nations is not going to set up a desk for people of African descent who reside in North America. We have to work out whatever our concerns are with our fellow Americans right here within the context of American politics. That means compromise. That means looking for a framework for political expression, which is broader than our racial identity, et cetera. So I want to say that. But I also want to say there's no reason to apologize for this. There's something positive to affirm. I take on this question about slavery. I'm in brief, because in fact, slavery was awful and it was wrong and it was on the backs of the enslaved Africans, and it had consequences that have endured long after the termination of the thing. But I also want to say, look at what has happened in the last 150 years for African Americans. And I want to say, look at the vitality of the institutions here in the United States of America, of the Democratic Republic of the United States of America. Again, not perfect, which are malleable enough, these institutions, to allow for the transformation of the status of African Americans, such as has occurred since the end of slavery. And I want to say there's a lot to celebrate in that. So this is our country. We are full members of the polity. We have burdens and responsibilities, as well as privileges that are associated with our membership in this republic. That does not mean that we should not fight for what we believe to be right, although we are not one voice here, we Black Americans. It does not mean that we should not protest things that we think are deserving of protest. But I want to say it does mean that we should not reject the framework that we're operating in, because we basically don't have any alternative, and because when viewed in full context, a noble and profoundly significant achievement, the United States of America, and a beacon to the rest of the world. I don't want to, go off in some starry-eyed kind of jingoistic celebration of America as the greatest civilization, et cetera, et cetera. But this great nation is our nation, and I think we Black Americans do best by beginning, this is my argument in the piece, by beginning from a framework which accepts that fact and then builds on it.
So Black patriotism is, if not exactly the same, rhymes, echoes American patriotism. So a Black American is first and foremost an American.
Yeah. A Black American is first and foremost an American, and it's a good thing too.
Let me return to the question of Dr. King and another powerful, impactful individual, Malcolm X, to ask you the question. Well, first, people often, perhaps inaccurately, portray them as representing two different ideals, approaches to the fight for civil rights. So Martin Luther King for the nonviolent approach, the peacemaker, and Malcolm X is the by any means necessary. What do you think about this distinction? And broadly speaking, in Black patriotism, in the future of Black Americans in the 21st century, what is the role of anger? What is the role of protest? Even, violence encompasses a lot of things, but just aggression and fuck the man, we're going to have to make change, force change.
Okay, I think you put your finger on something really important in the context of, we were just discussing my Black patriotism essay, and it's not the only story. There is another story, and Malcolm X is someone you identify, and his memory lives on and is powerfully influential. And I think you see it in Black Lives Matter, and I think you see it in the protest and rioting and so forth that has broken out periodically, going all the way back to the 1960s and before, but especially since the 1960s. You saw it in Los Angeles in 1992, in the Rodney King civil disturbances that broke out there, and the balled up fist, the radical Afrocentric rejection of the American story that Martin Luther King, he believed in. He believed in a magnificent promissory note. And a lot of people are rolling their eyes, and saying, as you say, fuck the man, magnificent promissory note. I mean, just get your knee off my neck. That's what you can do for me. Don't ask me to believe in your BS about some magnificent promissory note, some founding fathers who were all slave owners anyway. I mean, just get your knee off my neck. Now, I can relate to that. As I mentioned, I grew up in Chicago in the 1950s and the 1960s. I remember Malcolm X, literally in real time. I remember when he was murdered in 1965 in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, in Manhattan, in New York City. I remember my uncle. I was raised in a house where my aunt and uncle were the master of the house, and my mother and my sister and I lived in a small apartment upstairs in the back of this big house that my successful aunt and uncle owned. And my uncle was a small businessman, a barber and a tradesman. He was a hustler. Legally, he did what he had to do to make money. He was very enterprising, not especially well educated, but a very intelligent and disciplined and resourceful provider for his family, which included myself, my sister, and my mother in their household. And we called him Uncle Mooney because he had moon-shaped eyes that protruded and were round. Uncle Mooney. James Ellis was his name, Uncle Mooney. James Ellis Lee was my Uncle Mooney. But I'm saying all that to say this. He admired the Nation of Islam. King and Malcolm X, Martin King and Malcolm X differed along a number of different dimensions. Malcolm X was a Muslim, and Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian minister. My Uncle Mooney didn't have any time for these Christian ministers. He thought that was the white man's religion. And back in that day, you go into a Black church and you'd see a portrait of Jesus, and he'd be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
Yeah.
He didn't even look like a Mediterranean. He didn't look like somebody who came from Palestine. He looked like somebody who came from Northern Europe or something like that. The picture of Jesus. And my Uncle Mooney rejected that whole thing. He would be damned if he was going to bend his knee to some white Jesus. But he was not a Muslim either. But he respected the Muslims. He brought home their newspaper. It was called Muhammad Speaks. This is the Nation of Islam. which is the Black Muslim movement, founded in American cities, in Detroit and in Chicago, going back to the early, middle 20th century, and growing into a very significant movement that had a lot of influence. Louis Farrakhan, a controversial figure, descends from this movement. It has fractured now and has the major part of the legacy of the Black Muslims has assimilated itself into Islam proper. Malcolm X made a famous pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina and came back with a very different vision about what it meant to be a Muslim, and understood himself to be a part of the large tradition and religious culture of Islam that has a global reach. And he had a different vision when he came back from that. Some people say that's why he was killed and so on. I don't know. I certainly find that to be plausible, that he became to constitute a threat to the sect, which was the Black Muslims, and had to be dealt with. I don't know if we'll ever know the full story on that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is the Black Muslims were there. Malcolm X was there. And in my experience, they constituted a counterpoint to the position of king, which depended on a kind of respect for the best of the tradition of American democracy, appealing to the better nature of our oppressors, live up to the full meaning of our creed. I mean, these are words that he would use. A magnificent promissory note is what he would think of as the Declaration of Independence and the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, unfulfilled ideal. And the Black Muslims were like, fuck that. We're going to take care of our own.
Mm.
We're going to build our own schools. We're going to build our own businesses. We're not waiting for the white man to do anything. Get your knee off my neck and get out of my way and let me take care of my own. And my uncle respected that. He respected the straight back, the stand up straight with your shoulders back. That's a Jordan Peterson. But I mean, this is way before Jordan Peterson, but that was his philosophy. Stand up straight, but raise your children. Don't be depending upon welfare. You taking welfare from the white man. You need to get busy. You need to educate yourself. You need to clean up your act, put down the fried chicken because it's going to kill you. My Uncle Mooney loved this book that Elijah Muhammad, they called him the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was the founder and the leader of the Nation of Islam. He had a book, and all the book said was, be smart, eat green vegetables, don't eat fried food, don't eat pork. They're Muslims. Don't eat pork, and take responsibility for your diet and be healthy. And, don't be putting a whole lot of pills into your body. You don't need to do that if you just get control of your diet and you eat properly. Now, my uncle loved this idea of responsibility for self and determination to build. He respected that in the Muslims, even if he didn't buy the religious part of it. And so, and by the way, when my uncle died in 1983, he left me a bequest. It wasn't money, unfortunately. It was his complete collection of the recorded speeches of Malcolm X. And I have these albums. These are 33 and a third LPs. There's 6 of them. And I have a complete collection, as best as my uncle could assemble, of the recorded speeches of Malcolm X. Now, why did he do that? He did that because he did not want me to forget. Don't be dependent upon the white man. Build your own. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Proud Black man. Take care of your business. Take care of your children. Pick up the trash in front of your house. Get busy. This was this philosophy. So violence now, that's another story. I mean, Malcolm X would say, we're going to defend ourselves. So you're going to mess with us, you racist, the Ku Klux Klan or whatever. We're going to arm ourselves and we're going to fight you back. You racist police who are oppressing and persecuting and abusing our people. Well, you better be ready because we're going to fight you back. Uh, and that too was a spirit that my uncle, that was a kind of attitude, a kind of posture. My uncle was not a radical. He was a businessman, but he respected this idea. You take your life in your own hands when you mess with us because we're prepared to defend ourselves.
So that blood runs in you too. That thread is when you write about black patriotism, that thread is there too. It's like you embody both the ideal that we're all American, but also that there is this oppressive history. There is the powerful that are manipulating you, that are oppressing you, and you can't just wait around for things to fix themselves. You have to take action. You have to take things into your own hands. And sometimes that means being angry. Sometimes that means being violent. That's there too.
Yeah,
Like,
it's there, but here and the but is, I don't, me today, Glenn Loury in 2022, think that that is the answer. I don't think that violent rebellion gets us anywhere at the end of the day. I think we're past that. There aren't Knight Rider, Ku Klux Klan people breaking down your door and dragging you away. There are not nooses thrown over a tree limb where you hang somebody from the tree because they whistled at a white woman or they got too much property in your community and you became, they were uppity Negroes and whatnot like that. That is a thing of the past in America, that the uh, situation is no longer the one that requires that kind of violent reaction, and that there is, if we look at the net effect of the so-called rebellions um, in American cities, they're negative. The George Floyd protests, which became violent and arsonous in the aftermath of civil disturbance and whatnot in the summer of 2020, I think set back the program for African Americans. I don't think it advanced it. Um, I think there are things to be concerned about. Schools that are not working, police that are not respecting citizens, and so forth. But I think that those are things that affect white Americans as well, and that the way to ultimately correct those things is to uh, make alliance and associate oneself with Americans who are concerned to change these things. And I don't think it's properly framed as a racial problem. And I certainly don't think that violent rebellion uh, gets us anywhere. I get the historical salience of that posture, and it made a lot of sense in the early and the mid 20th century. I don't think it makes very much sense at all in the early 21st century.